Cool. Well, welcome everyone. People on Zoom, welcome. So my name is Chris. I'm one of the flight instructors here at Springs Aviation. There's plenty of us. You'll see all of us kind of roaming around. Multiple of us have obviously taught your classes. So if you ever see any of us flight instructors, obviously feel free to grab us if you have any questions about anything. Just a little bit about my aviation background. I got into aviation out of the medical field. So post college, I went into the medical field, thought medicine was my route. Realized I didn't want to go into the debt or time for something that I was like, this is okay about. So my wife, her father, so my father-in-law, he was an A-10 pilot for the Air Force and is a United pilot. He's been flying with United for 28 years. And as I was considering that career change, he was like, let's get you in a plane, see how you like it. And he took me up for a flight, and that's all it took. That was about 3 years ago. Then I got my private pilot license. I was sitting in your guys' seat. I came to Springs Aviation, sat in on a ground school, and then started flying ever since then. I got my private, went to Centennial Denver to ATP. It's an accelerated program that pretty much gives you your instrument rating, your commercial rating, commercial multi-engine rating, and then they walk you through all your flight instructor ratings. So that from start to finish was about a year, and then yeah, been instructing ever since then. So I love aviation. I also love flying out here. I get a lot of people who come out of state to fly here, and they're like, this is what you get to see every day. So I said, yeah, my office sucks. But no, I love flying, and I love teaching people, kind of sparking the same interest in aviation. So that's a little bit about me. Zoom people, welcome. So now I'm just going to switch to my PowerPoint, and yeah, we're just going to learn about airport communications and operations. Is this okay for you guys? Am I blocking anything? Cool. I'll sit straight on. Thanks. So, oh, I can't sit straight on. Airport operations and communications. So starting off with airports, we have different types of categories. So commercial service airports are the airports you're most used to. DIA, Atlanta, Chicago International. These are airports that board at least 2,500 passengers each year. So there's an exception as well. I mean, this can also be a little bit smaller of airports as well, like Centennial. Centennial, a lot of corporate people fly in and out of, to where they see roughly the same, at least 2,500 passengers. So again, that's really for air travel, the airports that you're used to going to. We then have cargo service airports. A lot of times, so this is where the planes carrying cargo have a total annual landing weight of more than 100 million pounds. Usually these are connected to your commercial service airports. So like FedEx, UPS, they fly out of Denver, are kind of connected. So a lot of times they can be one and the same. And then you have reliever airports, which relieve congestion at commercial airports. Probably an example of this would be Colorado Springs, sometimes for Denver. So if there's just way too much traffic or a storm rolls in and they're having planes holding a pattern, just circling, they sometimes will, direct them down to Colorado Springs and just kind of shuttle the people where they need to. So reliever airports are those to help congestion. And then lastly, our general aviation airports. These are the largest single group of airports in the US. when you think of most airports, it is general aviation just because they're small, they're easy to put places, and most planes are small planes. So these do make up a good part of airports. And then you get into type. So you have military, which obviously military personnel or DoD can land on. You have civilian, which civilians can obviously land, and private. Private airports are usually, again, privately owned by people who either build it on their lots, build it in a community, and then houses kind of share those. And those are the people who are authorized to land on private airports are the people kind of associated with the airport. Now, private airports, you don't want to land on them. However, if you have an emergency, like an engine failure or something comes up in flight, you can obviously land on a private airport. Peterson's a good example. Sometimes military and civil airports are connected. So Colorado Springs, you have civil airplanes landing there. However, you also have military airplanes landing there going to Peterson. So sometimes those can be connected, and Colorado Springs is actually a good example of that. So then we get into towered and non-towered airports. You guys kind of went over sectionals last time, but a quick way to determine if an airport is towered or non-towered is by this magenta or blue. So obviously, if on your VFR sectional it's in this magenta, it's a non-towered airport, or a towered airport is in the blue. So the exception sometimes is your less busy controlled or towered airports have operating control tower hours. When those hours are no longer in operation, it then will turn into an uncontrolled airport. So sometimes towered airports can become uncontrolled, or sorry, non-towered. And then just a quick reference. So when I was talking about private, this right here, this symbol with this R, that represents a private runway. This double ring is a military runway. And then all of these are civilian runways. So that's what they look like when you're looking on a VFR sectional. You'll spend plenty of time studying that, but these are at least quick ways to reference and be able to tell what they are. Fun quick note real quick. See how there's tick marks coming off of this outer circle? It actually means when you see that there's fuel available at the airport. If it's just a ring without anything, there's no fuel available. So good thing to know if you ever have an emergency and you're looking for nearby airports to land. All right, so when it comes to airports, there's multiple sources of airport data. You guys went over it last week. Aeronautical sectional charts are one of your best tools for finding quick information that you need to about an airport. It will tell you pretty much the basics, elevation, runway lengths, if it's towered or untowered. That's your quickest go-to. Then you have chart supplements. These, as it's written, are sometimes referred to as the AFD, which is also known as Airport Facility Directory. You'll hear pilots refer to it as both kind of interchangeably. They recently kind of renamed it Chart Supplement. So if you come across older pilots who really aren't aware that it's been updated Chart Supplement, they may say the AFD. But your Chart Supplement will give you more in-depth information about the airport. It'll break it down to every runway. So it'll say runway 33, it has an upslope of 2.4%. And then runway 15 has a downslope. So it's a little bit more in depth, and it lets you know a little more of the procedures It makes you aware of potentially fences along runways or along taxiways. So it's just a little more in depth. You can access this through the FAA website by searching digital chart supplements. And then it gives you by regions. So Colorado's in the Southwest supplement. So it'll start off with, I don't know, like Arizona. So you kind of have to scroll down to find Colorado. And then under Colorado, you have to look for your specific airport. It takes a little bit of time, but it's pretty straightforward. Literally, if you just Google like chart supplement for Meadow Lake Airport, it'll bring you a link pretty much right away. Notices to airmen. So they're also always referred to as NOTAMs. These are time critical information about the airport environment. So it's maybe that something is wrong. So like right now, a common one that they do after it snows, they have plows that go out and they'll say, caution, 4 foot high piles of snow along taxiway Bravo, blah, blah, blah. Or they'll say, like if your approach lighting system is out, they'll say, be advised, the approach lighting system for 3-5 is out. So it gives you time critical information about the specific airport. Again, you can access these through the FAA website. You can type in NOTAMs for Colorado Springs and it'll pop it right up. And then you have your ATIS. So this is Automated Terminal Information Service. This just really gives you your weather. It's what you get before you take off. So when you're in the plane, you plug into the ATIS, it'll tell you wind direction, it'll tell you the temperature, the dew point, and then your altimeter setting to set your altimeter to. And with that, for the super critical NOTAMs, they'll actually put NOTAMs at the end of the recording. So they issue an ATIS report at the top of every hour. And so when they issue at the top of every hour, they also assign a letter to it. So hour 1, they pretty much start with alpha and you tune into it, it'll say ATIS information alpha, and it'll say wind 350. So then when it goes into the top of the next hour, it'll then be information Bravo. This is important because when you this is found at a tower, a controlled tower that has air traffic control working, you tell them which information you have. If you say Charlie when it's really on Delta, they'll say, hey, information Delta's current, go get it. So this helps them know that you've listened to the weather, you know which runways they're using to take off. That way they don't have to relay all this over the radio, taking up their time, if that makes sense. Out here, we actually have an AWOS. You guys are going to learn about it next time because he's going over weather stuff. But we just have an uncontrolled towers. We have just an automated system. It does at the top of every hour, but there's no like Alpha Bravo or anything. It just reports what it's observing on the station. But it's similar. It gives you pretty much the same information. So we'll be going into runways, airport marking signs, and signage. So through this graph, if you guys have the PHAC, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, this graph is actually located in Appendix C. So I tabbed that out because for you to study that is huge. To be able to effectively operate around an airport environment is you'll have to know all these signs and what they mean, but we'll be going through them. But the biggest one really is these mandatory signs. Anything that's red with white lettering, you can think of as a stop sign, as you have to oblige, but we'll get into that. But the first part is going over runways. So at an airport, when they're building runways, they scope and surveillance the area in which they're going to lay the runway. And then they build runways based off the prevailing winds. So they observe the most common winds of the area and build their runways accordingly. A lot of runways have their like primary runway and a crosswind runway. So primarily the winds will be blowing down one runway, but in case it changes, they usually build a crosswind runway, kind of like what you can see here, so that when the winds are not normal, you still have a safe runway to land on. We have that here at Meadow Lake. Ours is actually more so for landing. Some of them, it's fine if you take off and land, but ours is pretty much designated for landing. And the Academy is like that as well. But runways are then named based off of magnetic north. So that's important because a lot of your avionics today calculate true north, give you headings to fly and everything. However, if you have a system failure, every plane is required to have a magnetic compass. So then if you're navigating, you can always get to a runway based off of your magnetic compass. So that's an important thing to know, is they are laid out based off of magnetic north. And then they round the numbers to the nearest tenth. And so, for example, this runway 33, let's say its actual magnetic heading is maybe 333. They don't want to put a 333 on the runway, so they just round it to 33. So really being 330. And then the other thing to know is they take off the last number. Or for single digits, they take off the first and last number. So yeah, as you see, runway 33 is actually a heading of 330 degrees, but the way you would say that is 33. And then the runway 9 is actually a heading of 090, but they take off the 0 and the 9. Foreign countries, they leave on the 0. Here in the US, we take off the 0. Just because since they rounded to the nearest tenth, that's kind of why they can take off the leading 0, if that makes sense. And we will get to a little bit later, but you might have noticed when you're pronouncing runway numbers, you actually pronounce it one number at a time. So it's not runway 33, it's runway 33. It's not runway 15, runway 15. Cool. So then there's different types of runways. Essentially, the more complex the operations at an airport, the more complex the runway will be, essentially. So a visual runway, kind of pretty much what we have here, has numbers in a center line, because they don't have crazy operations. They don't have airliners flying in on their instruments, having to leave them in. They know that when people fly, it's mostly going to be visually flying. So it's not that crazy of markings. Then as your demands increase a little, Then as the demand kind of increases a little bit, so non-precision instrument, they'll add some more markings. So this beginning part is called a threshold. It just signals in the air that this is where the beginning of the runway is and you can land. And then it has these two markings here, which are technically called your aiming points, also referred to commonly as 1,000-footers, because they are 1,000 feet from where the runway begins. And that's where you typically want to try to touch wheels down within this spot. And then you have your most precise runways. This is what you can find at huge airports, DIA, because they have a lot of planes flying in based off of their instruments, which then lead them to all these markings. So really they're adding these right here. These are touchdown zone markings, just letting planes know they want to try to touch down. And then there's these touchdown zone markings are spaced every 500 feet. Interesting enough, every marking, they try to make it consistent through the US. Not all airports are going to be specific, but each marking has a length. Usually the numbers are roughly 65 feet long. And then the beginning of one runway stripe is roughly 120 feet. The gap in between runway stripes is roughly 80 feet. So really the beginning of one runway stripe to the beginning of another runway stripe is 200 feet. Really, this just gives pilots additional information depending on what they need to do. If they need to put the plane right down on the beginning, this lets them kind of know how much like room they're working with and stuff. But again, that's kind of more for more precise operations, so to say. And then actually these 1,000 footers. So aiming point, these are referred to as aiming point, 1,000 footers, or your in-flight instructors might say captain bars. Up. Oh, shoot. Okay, thanks. But yeah, captain's bars, they may call them. So we then have relocated runway thresholds. Like I said, a threshold indicates the beginning of a runway. It lets you know where the runway begins and where you can land. Some airports, based off of who knows what they built in an area, but now there's buildings popping up on the approaching of the runway. It's now unsafe to approach the runway on their current glide slopes, so they may have to relocate the beginning of the runway. It's usually indicated by these yellow chevron marks. And a good rule of thumb is when you see yellow lines, it's taxiway, white lines, runway. You can, so you can use the spot leading up to it for taxiing, but you cannot take off or land, obviously, in the spot designated for taxiing. It does shorten the runway length available, but airport information, that chart supplement we referred to before, will give you how much runway is available. This is called a displaced threshold. Again, these sometimes may be temporary because of obstructions, cranes, maybe towers they put up on the approach end to then signify the beginning of the runway because maybe the approach end is unsafe. So these can be used for taxi takeoff, but you cannot land in the area. So you can't land in this entire area before this threshold. But if you're landing on the opposite runway and you're still trying to come to a stop, you can actually come to a complete stop if you're landing on the opposite runway using this to help you stop, if that makes sense. But if we're coming in for runway 35, we could not land in this area. Oops. Okay. Let's go a little bit. And then these are blast pads indicated by, again, chevrons, but they won't allow taxiing on this. It's just designated areas to protect property, cars, whatever, from jet blast so that the jet blast doesn't just destroy whatever it's going on to. Can't use it really for anything except for emergencies if you absolutely have to. Otherwise, can't be on it. Sometimes runways will be closed, and when they do that, they'll put a giant X on the runway. More so if it's permanent, they'll paint it on the runway and place it every 1,000 feet. If it's not permanent, then they usually have signs that are vertical with a big X letting you know that the runway is closed. Now, this also can be applied to taxiways. They can close taxiways as well. But usually that'll be announced over a NOTAM or air traffic control telling you not to taxi on it. But you can sometimes find these on taxiways. So one of the most important signs and markings that you will have in aviation is a hold short marking. That's what this is. It's the double solid line, double broken line. That means it's the area where you have to stop before approaching a runway. That marking, you can never cross that without getting a clearance from air traffic control to cross that hold short marking. Associated with it is this red 2-1. So again, it's kind of, this sign indicates you're approaching runway 21. And like I said, the red signs are kind of like a stop sign. You need to stop. It's letting you know also visually, stop here. The way that I like to think about hold short signs is that the solid double line will always be on the side of the taxiway approaching a runway. So a solid line means I cannot cross that. I have to stop. Now you may think, well, what about an uncontrolled airport? You always have to stop. The only time you can cross that is one, you visually verify no one is coming in to land on final. No one is currently on the runway. And because it's an uncontrolled airport, sometimes people, if we have winds that people can't decide on which runway, you might actually have a plane coming in to land on the opposite end of the runway. So you always confirm that those three are clear of aircraft before you cross that. Out here, we have a lot of pilots who just get lax with it, but the FAA is really honing down that everyone follows these intently. So again, this is a hold short sign. A runway can have multiple points where a taxiway can go up to the runway. This is one of those incidents, like cases. So we have runway 18-36. What that's saying is it's the same physical runway. It's just saying if you want to get to the 36 side of the runway, it's on the right and you have to go right to get to the beginning of runway 36. If you're looking to be on the 180 side of the runway, it's on the left and you actually have to go left to get to the beginning of runway 18. So in the previous example, we are at the beginning of 21. So it just lists 21. So this shows you you're at the beginning of the runway. So that's something to be aware of. There are airports, many airports, that they have multiple runways, and along with it, multiple hold short signs. You have to get a clearance across each hold short sign. What that would be like is you would call tower, you'd say holding short of 35 left. They'd say, great, go ahead and cross 35 left, hold short of 35 center. So you could pass this one, and then you'd have to hold short again right here, then get another clearance to cross that. They may sometimes, if they're not busy at all, they'll say, go ahead and cross 35 left and 35 Charlie. In that case, they've given you permission to cross both. Otherwise, you have to stop at every single one. And if you're ever unsure, always stop because you're not breaking any rule. All they'll say is you're good to go. You don't want it to be the opposite. If you cross that and now create a collision hazard for an aircraft, you're possibly looking at your license getting taken away. So these are the most important signs in an airport environment. So now this is the runway coming up to a hold short sign. We addressed the solid side as like a barrier you can't cross, but the broken side you can freely cross because you are coming off the runway trying to get clear of the runway, so you can freely cross the hold short side on the broken side. So that's how I kind of remember it. The solid barrier means I must stop. I can't pass without clearance. The broken side is I can freely cross. You clear your plane all the way across it, and then you come to a complete stop, perform an after landing checklist, or if you're at a controlled tower, you have to call ground, get a taxi clearance. Does that make sense? Okay. Cool. What this does is it creates a runway safety area. So aircraft taking off, aircraft coming into land. Let's say there's crazy crosswinds where they can't maintain control. They get blown off the runway. What it's really doing is creating this area where they can safely do whatever they need to without running into us. Because if we just go right up to it and they get slightly blown off, they could be creating a collision hazard with us. So these are put in place to give a safety area for unexpected things that happen in aviation, and they do happen often. So that's really the importance of these hold short lines, also that you're not going onto a runway with an active plane on it. What you'll also see is ILS area hold shot, critical area hold signs. This is the ladder looking one. So it looks like a ladder. You most likely, it'd be rare that you guys encounter these as a private pilot without an instrument rating, because once ILS is in effect, that means the minimums are pretty much below VFR flying that a private pilot could do. And they're having planes coming in based off their instruments. However, they have this hold short so that planes stop here and don't interfere with signals that are guiding planes in both vertically and laterally. So it's rare that you'd probably encounter this as a VFR pilot, but you never know. But if air traffic control tells you hold short of the ILS critical hold area, you hold at where this ladder is, and I'll have this ILS next to it. So that's what that looks like. So a visual representation of what it's doing is, you can see this is a normal hold short area, and this is the ILS hold area. It's creating that protection, like I said, so that the signal that's getting sent out to aircraft instruments is not getting blocked. Because if our plane was here, our tail or whatever may interfere with a plane vertically being guided down to the runway. So that's why they have those in effect. Runway location signs will be a black background with yellow lettering. This is true for all location signs. It's just runway location signs have numbers in them. So in this case, 21, you're on runway 21. Mental aid that I use to remember this is just like driving a car. When we drive a car, we drive on black asphalt with usually a 2-lane road. There's white or yellow stripes in the middle. Whatever helps you kind of keep that in mind. Black background with yellow lettering will always tell you where you are located. The next thing runways have are distance remaining signs. These are black backgrounds with white lettering, and they will always have a number on them. And then that number is times by 1,000 feet. So if you see that, like in this example, 3, the runway distance remaining is 3,000 feet. And then it'll go, 3, 2, 1. So again, just additional information. It's not located on every runway. Again, kind of more precise runways. We don't have them out here, but Colorado Springs does. Land and hold short operations. It's always referred to as lasso. So someone may give you a lasso clearance. That's what they're referring to. What it is they're giving one aircraft clearance to land. And if they say land and hold short, they're saying land and hold short of a specific spot on the runway, usually that hold short marking that we saw. So in this example, one aircraft is cleared to use the full length of the runway. So this aircraft coming in is cleared to use this entire length. This aircraft is cleared to land and then hold short. So what this really does, you'll see it at busy airports, it increases efficiency at airports. You have to have a private pilot license or above to be able to participate. As a student pilot, you cannot. And when you accept a land and hold short clearance, you are now responsible to making sure you can land and come to a complete stop before that spot. You always have the option to deny one. So if they say, can you accept a land hold short on runway whatever, you'd say unable. It gives them a little bit more work, but again, if you're a more experienced pilot, you're familiar with an airport, you know you can absolutely stop before then, sure, go ahead and do it. You fly into an unfamiliar airport, you don't have that many hours, I would deny it. Because what happens if this aircraft has an emergency on the runway and they have to do a go around? You guys are now converging and potentially creating a very dangerous situation. So that's why they don't allow student pilots to do it. They want private pilot license or above. So yeah, I've actually never heard anyone issued one or been even offered a land and hold short clearance. But we in Cessnas could pretty much land before any land and hold short marker. But again, based on your experience and you're familiar with an airport, I usually decline them just to give me a safety net. So again, this is a taxiway location sign. The only difference is now there's a letter associated with it letting you know which taxiway you're on. So taxiways will always be letters. Just like a runway hold short line, we have taxiway hold short lines. And these are different because it's just one solid bar, one broken bar. Same rules apply. You have to stop. You have to get clearance from ground air traffic control before going on to the taxiway. Or if you're at an uncontrolled airport, confirming that you're not going to be a taxi hazard to any other aircraft. But if you're on the side, that's usually coming from the ramp or wherever you're starting your aircraft. It'll always usually be from the ramp leading onto the taxiway. However, if you're getting off the taxiway, again, you have that broken lines you can freely cross. Destination signs. So they're the opposite of location signs. They have yellow background and black lettering. These just tell you where a spot is. So if you're coming up, you'll see this on the side of a taxiway or a runway. And this would be telling you that taxiway Echo is to your right because it has an arrow pointing to the right. Yeah, pretty straightforward. But it can be sometimes confusing to get these mixed up with location signs because oftentimes they're placed together. So that's where whatever memory aid helps you remember destination signs versus location signs will help you out, or else you'll get confused on an airport taxiway. So this is a perfect example. So the black with yellow lettering lets us know we are currently on Alpha, taxiway Alpha. If we've been given directions to go to taxiway X-ray, that's saying that taxiway X-ray, we'd take a turn to the right, roughly 45 degrees. Taxiway Lima, turn to the left. So it's not uncommon to see them paired together. So that's where I say whatever memory aid helps you kind of remember that. Otherwise, it's just confusing. So based on what we learned, where would you all say we are on this airport? Based on this sign, sorry. This bottom sign. Bravo, yeah. Perfect, yep. Taxiway Bravo, right here. So this is a good example of where it can kind of be a little confusing taxiways. If you're trying to take Foxtrot to the left, it's showing you it's the one that's slightly angled at 45 degrees. Sierra to the left is your 90-degree left turn. And then, Foxtrot to the right is kind of a more than a 90-degree turn. So that's what it would actually look like on an airport environment. So this is a taxiway diagram. Taxiway diagrams give you a layout of the airport, the taxiways, and the runways. On it, they list what are called airport hotspots. The airport hotspots will always have these circles assigned with a HS, whatever number. These are a location on the airport movement area which has a history or potential risk of collision or runway incursion or heightened attention by pilots is necessary. Most likely a collision has happened here, or the designers of the airport have specifically laid out that this is a spot that is crazy with traffic. So this diagram actually on the right is Centennial Airport in Denver. It's where I trained out of. And it's hard. I had a bigger photo. It's hard to see, but I mean, this spot here, this taxiway leads to it. This taxiway leads to it. This ramp leads to it. This taxiway, this runway taxiway pull off, this runway taxiway pull off. So there's a lot of potential of aircraft to just collide right there. So that's just letting you know spots on the airport. Have your eyes out, have your eyes peeled, take it slower than you normally would. That way you're not going to be running into other aircraft. If that makes sense. So runway incursion avoidance, this is kind of putting it all together. The FAA is honing down on this. So to quote the, saying, any occurrence in the airport runway environment involving an aircraft, vehicle, person, or object on the ground that creates a collision hazard or results in a loss of required separation with an aircraft taking off, intending to take off, landing, or intending to land. So, right, it actually seems rare, but you have 3 of these that happen each day at controlled towered airports with someone directing. So, and even then it's like, okay, 3 a day, that doesn't seem that much, but it does equate to 1,100 accidents per year. And the FAA is saying this is way too much. So what can we do to make sure we don't create a collision or an incursion in the runway environment? Absolutely knowing those hold short lines. Pulling up, briefing those hot spots on the airport. When you get a taxi clearance, they're going to say taxi via Bravo, Charlie, Delta. Go over that before you even start moving the aircraft and say, yep, where Bravo meets Charlie, that's a hot spot. The biggest thing is if you get to an airport, some taxiways are so complex, it gives you a migraine. Or if you just go to an airport you're unfamiliar with, you can always ask for progressive taxiing. They will say, yep, we'll give you progressive taxiing. Go ahead and just keep taxiing on Alpha. And then when you're approaching wherever they want you to go, they'll say, you're approaching taxiway Charlie, go ahead and take a right on Charlie. So they kind of walk you through it, hold your hand through taxiing. But hey, that saves you from not getting in an incursion. Sterile cockpit is associated with that. What that means is no unnecessary talk, only talk that is important for the flight. So, no talking. You can't just be ready to taxi and be like, what do you think about the debates? But it's more so, hey, how's that aircraft? Are they a concern? So you're going to see this in your checklist when you start flying. That's what sterile cockpit means. Oh yeah, complete all checklists prior to aircraft movement. Obviously, it's like texting and driving. Doing checklists and taxiing an aircraft, you're not going to be aware of your situations around you. Brief your landing rollout at busy and unfamiliar airports. You usually will have an idea of where you're trying to go at an airport, like an FBO, a place that you need to go refuel. You can know where that is on the airport. And as you're approaching, saying, okay, we know the fuel pump after we land we have to do a left turn. So when we land, we're most likely going to do a left turn off of the runway. So just brief your landings before you even land. Know where you're going to go. Always confirm you're landing on the runway you're cleared to land. This happens I think Harrison Ford is famous. No, he landed on a taxiway. But there's confusing airports. Some airports have left, center, right. And if they say you're cleared to land, 17 left, but you line up for 17 center, you're on the wrong taxiway. So always have a pad, paper, write down what they tell you, and always confirm. Okay, I was confirmed on 17 left. I now see center and right, so I'm correct. I'm lined up on the right runway. Also, runways, like I said, are usually white. They always have a big number associated at the approach end. Taxiways are usually yellow. When you're coming into land, you should be lined up and see a number. I can't believe that people actually do land on taxiways, but that happens. Cool. Even under ATC authority, you're pilot in command and responsible to see and avoid. You can decline an instruction if it's unsafe to flight. So this does happen. I mean, right? Air traffic control they're not flawless. They are just other humans on the other side potentially making mistakes. So even though they give you a clearance, you may see, okay, there's an aircraft right in that path. Or they may say, go ahead and take off runway blank blank at this intersection, and you see a plane coming right at you. You obviously see that's unsafe. So you can decline an air traffic control instruction as long as it is unsafe to flight. Like I said, they will make mistakes. You will make mistakes. Yeah, that's really our first section. We can go ahead and take 10-minute break, reconvene 7 o'clock. cool. Test. Sweet. All right. So now we're getting into airport lighting. So lighting for airports is standardized across all airports so that everyone knows the same lighting system. There won't be confusions, obviously, for runway incursions. This is kind of what a typical airport would look like at night. This is what Meadow Lake looks like at night. You have your taxiways in blue and then your runway in that white. But we'll get more specifically into those lights in just a second. So all airports have airport beacons. And well, okay, I shouldn't say all. The majority of airports have beacons. They're operated from dusk until dawn or below VFR minimums, which is less than 1,000-foot ceiling and less than 3 statute mile visibility. As you guys, I don't know if you've ever paid attention, literally the one from Meadow Lake Airport is in our parking lot right here. So civilian beacons flash, they alternate between white and green. So when you're flying to an airport at night, you're trying to find it, you look for a white flash followed by a green flash. Water airports have the white and yellow. So obviously if you're flying in the sea, Colorado has like 2 water-based airports. Heliports, they have all the colors. They flash white, yellow, green. If you guys are familiar with the Children's Hospital off Powers, and I think that's Research, that hospital has a helicopter beacon kind of going 24/7. So and you can see it from Powers if you're driving north or south, I guess. If you ever look at that building, you'll see the flashing white, yellow, green. And then military airports have 2 flashes of white followed by green. And so your question may be, well, what is Colorado Springs Airport since it's military and civilian? That's actually just white and green. But if you look a little further past it, sometimes at night, Fort Carson, you can see the double white, 1 green. So if you're ever driving around the city or at a overlook, try to look for those. It's kind of cool. So taxi lights, the taxi edge lights will always be in blue. And if an airport doesn't have physical lights installed, some airports have blue reflectors on the side lining the taxiways. And then kind of your more advanced airports will have taxi centerline lights, which are these green ones. We don't have them here at Meadow Lake. We do have the blue lights on the edge, but Colorado Springs, I believe, has the green taxi lights. So if you ever fly over there at night, you can kind of see that. It's pretty cool. Then from the taxiway, that would obviously lead us to hold short. Hold short lights, if they're equipped with them, have these flashing yellow lights on the side of the hold short marking, along with some lights within the hold short marking on the ground. Again, we don't have this here at Meadow Lake. If you ever pay attention to DIA, next time you're holding short of a runway at night, you'll see these flashing. And again, that's a big way to get your attention to stop, don't cross this line. Now runway lights. So runway edge lights will always be white, along with runway center lights. They're white, hard to miss. When you're approaching a runway, the beginning of the runway are green. So it'll be green. And then the opposite end, the end will be red. Now they do kind of have dividers. So obviously one side is green. The side approaching or facing the runway coming the other way is red. So when you're approaching the runway, you'll see green, but as you land on the far side of the runway, you'll see the red lights and identifying the end of the runway. The beginning of the runway sometimes is also equipped with runway end identifier lights that just flash white. It's another way to get your attention of the beginning of the runway. We at Meadow Lake, we have the green lights, but we don't have the flashing white lights on the side of the runway. So they stay the same, except one side will be red if you look like 180 degrees. Correct, depending on the angle. So if you're on one side, you'll see red. Flip the other side, you'll see green. But good question. So then once you land, the taxi or the runway center lights, as you're approaching the end of the runway, they start alternating between white and red, letting you know you're approaching the end of the runway. You better stop. Again, they do that as well with the runway edge lights. As you start approaching the end of the runway, they alternate from white to yellow, saying caution, stop now. And then again, the more advanced airports will have taxiway lead-off lights, which are those green and yellow lights coming off, just letting you know if you follow this, it's going to take you to a taxiway. We have the most basic here at Meadow Lake. We pretty much have these green lights, white edge lights without the yellow caution. We don't even have center line stripes. So again, the more advanced the airport, the more advanced pretty much the lighting system with it as well. Pilot controlled lighting. Some airports that are uncontrolled have the option for pilots to control the lighting at night. This is an effort, one, to preserve energy, but two, allows pilots to use the lights when they need them. So what you do is you plug in the CTAF, Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. This is what you would talk to other aircraft on. Once you're plugged into that, it's called keying the mic. Keying the mic is literally just pressing the button so that you can talk. To activate the lights, what you do is you key the mic, you press it 7 times within 5 seconds to have high intensity lights come on, 5 times within 5 seconds to have medium intensity lights, 3 times within 5 seconds to have low intensity lights come on. They do operate on a 15-minute timer, so be aware of that. At night, I did have a video, it didn't work when it transferred. I told my student this. We're doing touch and goes at night, staying in the pattern. So I always say, within 2 touch and goes, take off, landing, click it again. Make sure the timer doesn't go off. Well, he didn't do that. So I got my phone out because I was anticipating. And as he was on short final, lights disappeared. And he freaked out. So know that it operates on a 15-minute timer. If you are staying within the airport environment more than 15 minutes, it's a good idea. Just click them again, kind of between a touch and go, if that's what you're doing. Does anyone have any questions based off that? I know it's a little different. Yeah. So it's for most, airports on a sectional, if it has a little, it'll tell you it has like a capital L with like a little star. That in the sectional, I wish I had one to show you guys, but that lets you know if this type of lighting is available. So it's quick information. A good amount of uncontrolled, again, not all of them, but a good amount have this ability. And even so, like at controlled tower, so Pueblo is a controlled tower. However, at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, the tower is now no longer in operation. It becomes uncontrolled. So they do the same. When it's in operation, they turn the lights on, but once they go off the job, then it would turn into this. They turn off the lights. Anyone who needs them on can talk into the frequency, click this on, and they come on. Oh, okay. Sorry, the previous question was, do all runways have this pilot controlled lighting? And it was most uncontrolled do it. If you go into a control tower, they will have the lights on. Most control towers, though, actually put their lights on the lowest intensity because most of their plane arriving at those have been flying all night. So their eyes are acclimated to the least amount of light possible. So they keep it on low frequency. But it's available a good amount of places. We have approach light systems. This is primarily used to provide a transition from instrument flight to visual flight. So again, this just helps you identify the runway, and it's mainly for instrument flying, but you guys will probably see this throughout your flying. If you fly at night and go to Colorado Springs, you're going to see it. If you fly at night and go to Centennial, really any airport around the Denver area, you're going to see these approach lighting systems. They're just a better way to help pilots popping out of the clouds at low altitudes to help them find the runway. But really, it's just used for instrument. And it's nice for us to even identify runways. We then have these lights on the side of the runway as we're approaching. This is specifically a visual approach slope indicator. This lets you know if you're on a good path on final as you start your descent to land on the runway in that safe area. So most of the time, that runway marking where I identified as the 1,000-footers or the aiming point, these are what these lights are going to bring you down to, is roughly that aiming point or the 1,000-footers for runways that have them. Otherwise, these are established to give you obstacle clearance while safely coming to the runway. So in this, there's 2 bars over 2 bars, which that's what a typical VASI looks like. When you have 2 red over 2 red, you're too low. That means you need to add power and try to get higher. When you have 2 red over 2 white, that means you're on a perfect glide slope down to the runway. That's going to give you obstacle clearance. So the danger of being below it is now you're not guaranteed obstacle clearance. So it's important that you want to correct, especially at night, because you can't see most things, to stay on a proper glide slope. When you have 2 white over 2 white, you're too high. So you would, in that case, reduce your power, descend a little bit so that you get red over white. Red over white is your ideal situation. And then these are just sayings that help me remember in flight what's good, what's bad. So red over red, you're dead because you're too low. Red over white, you're all right. White over white, you're flying all night because you're too high. Yeah, but essentially, it brings you perfectly to the runway. Another form of this is your precision approach path indicator. It's called PAPI. This has just 4 lights lined up to each other. I like it because Meadow Lake, we have the VASI system. Colorado Springs has the PAPI system. So you actually get exposed to both. This one is actually a little bit more precise and can tell you if you're slightly high, slightly low, or really high, or really low. Because 4 white means that you're pretty dang high. 3 white with 1 red means that you're slightly high. You just need to descend a little bit more to get 2 white, 2 red. Again, even white, even red is always an indicator that you're on the glide slope you need to be. 1 white, 3 red, slightly low, and then obviously 3 red, you're really low. I like these. Like I said, it tells you kind of how far off you are because you can be a little bit more precise. The next ones, they're in your textbook. We go over. I've literally never encountered these in my life. So tricolor light system. It's just kind of one light that shines out these colors. And kind of your question on the runway and identifier lights, these actually have dividers within the light based on the degree. So it shines out these colors all in one unit, but it has dividers within it that give you certain angles, letting you know if you're too high, too low. I don't know if does that make sense? Does that not make sense? Anyway, so tricolor. If you're above glide path, you get an amber on a tricolor. Green is good. If you have green, you're on glide path. Amber, you're slightly low. My caveat with that is there's an amber for high and an amber for low, so that can get confusing. You'll quickly find out though, if you think you're high, it'll turn red. Like I said, I've never encountered these and I have flown to a lot of airports, but it's important to note. Pulsating light system, same thing, single unit, just pulsates lights. So if you're high, it'll be a pulsating white. If you're on glide path, white. If you're slightly below, a steady red. If you're way below, pulsating red. Really just to get your attention. Obstruction lights at night. I'm sure you guys have seen these if you've traveled to a city. Usually obstruction lights are always red, placed on the corners of buildings, placed on cranes. We have out to the east a windmill farm. They have red lights in the center of each windmill and they all blink in unison. I don't know if you guys have ever just seen that driving around here, but it's pretty cool to see at night. So usually if you see red lights and you're flying at night, avoid it. There can be times when they also use flashing white lights to also get your attention. So they'll have red and flashing white saying, usually if it's a really tall thing, saying, hey, this is really tall, they're trying to get your attention. But they place what these lights look like kind of on the corner of each building. All right, moving on to wind direction indicators. So we have three types here. So your most common is going to be your windsock cone. The big opening of the cone indicates where the wind is coming from, blowing through the tail and going out the other end. So as you can see in the diagram, the wind is coming from the right to left. The opening of the cone is right, the tail is blowing left. Tetrahedron kind of points to where it blows with the wind, but the way that I remember it is it almost points the direction you should land, because we always want to land and take off into the wind. So you kind of think of that pointing in the direction where you should land. Otherwise, the wind, whatever helps you remember it, the wind blows it to face where the wind is blowing. The same is true with this wind tee. This is kind of representation of our plane. It faces where the wind is blowing from, I guess, and it's a kind of representation of how you should land. So our plane should be roughly facing this way to land into the wind. I honestly, again, I've never seen a tetrahedron. I've never seen a wind tee. I've always seen wind socks. The thing to be aware of sometimes with these tetrahedrons, they're big and heavy. And sometimes if you have drastic wind, actually airport managers or, air traffic control authorities will go and actually tie these down. So they'll like clip it into place, lock it into place. So they caution you that sometimes it's not even a reliable reading. So that is something to be aware of. But if that happens, if they have a tetrahedron, I gotta assume they're also gonna have some other form of wind reading for that situation, if that ever happens. But your windsock is going to be your most common reading or common wind indicator. And like I said, we always take off and land into the wind. So when it comes to flying, this is where it can get interesting. So as we learned, runways are laid out for their magnetic heading. So if you fly 3-3, you're flying to a 330 heading. When winds are reported, they report where the winds are coming from. So if we have winds reported from 330, that means the winds are coming from the direction 330, blowing southeast. And that's important to remember. They almost try to make our job easier. So if you hear winds reported 33, you can take off the runway most closely to that number. So we would take off runway 33 because the winds are coming from the direction of 330, and we'd be taking off to the direction of 330. Does that make sense? Is that confusing? Any questions? Okay. That's just one big thing that I like to tell people. So when you're trying to figure out, you listen to the weather, they give you a wind reading. When you're trying to figure out what runway to take off, you have your heading indicator in the plane that literally lists, every degree. In this case, if we have runway 33 and 15, which we do here, winds are reported 300, which runway do we want to take off? Well, 300 is much more favorable to 33 than it is 15. If we take off 15, we would actually be taking off with with a good tailwind component rather than mostly a headwind component with a slight crosswind component, because it's 30 degrees off of the runway. So again, rarely is it ever straight down the runway, but you want to take off the runway that's closest to a headwind that you can. Now there are, like I said, we have a runway that sometimes we do have a direct crosswind. I mean, if we have, a wind of 260, that's pretty much a direct crosswind for runway 15 and 33. But we could come in and land 270, and if it's reported winds of 260, it'd be mostly a headwind component. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Taxiing in the wind. When you're taxiing in the wind, if the winds are strong enough, they can legitimately blow the plane over or off the taxiway. So to fight that, we hold our elevator and ailerons in a certain position, and that's on your yoke. So yoke or steering wheel, if you guys haven't been in the plane yet. On your steering wheel, it's called a yoke in the plane. When you have a wind that's coming from a quartering head, so 90 degrees from, in front of you to the left, it says to use up aileron on left-hand wing and neutral elevator. Well, how easy is that to remember? I never remember that, even as an instructor. But that means, as a quartering headwind, we do neutral elevator. So with the yoke, you're not pushing forward or pulling back. That physically moves our elevator on our tail up or down. You just keep it in the center. You're not pushing or pulling. And what up aileron on the left-hand wing, if you have a left quartering headwind, means is just turning into the wind. So if you have a quartering headwind from your left, you turn the yoke left. That'll deflect your aileron up. What that does with your aileron deflected up, the wind is blowing out over the top of the wing, hitting that aileron, wanting to push that down, pushing that wing down, as opposed to if our aileron was down, the wind under our wing would hit that down deflected aileron, force that wing upward, and potentially flip your wing over, thus flipping us over. So the same when you have a quartering headwind is neutral elevator. You're not pushing forward or backward with the yoke, and you're turning into the direction where the wind is coming from. Now it's slightly different when you have a quartering tailwind. So again, this diagram says use down aileron on the left-hand wing and down elevator if it's a quartering left tailwind. The saying I like is you do down elevator. So when you have a quarter tailwind, you press forward. Press forward, that deflects our elevator down, allowing wind behind us to flow over our tail. And then you turn away from the direction that it's hitting you. So if it's hitting us behind us from the left, you turn away from it to the right. So you're pushing forward, turning away. That one, I know it takes a little bit, but those two sayings will help you instead of trying to remember what this graph says. This graph is in every POH that tells you how to control, the plane. So using the reason why we don't pull it back with a quarter tailwind, if we pulled our yoke back, that deflects our elevator up. The wind can now catch that and literally lift our tail up so we flip over the nose. So the other thing you have to keep in mind while we taxi, we make a lot of turns. We make a lot of 90-degree turns. We sometimes turn 180 degrees. So what we have on a good amount of the planes, some of them we don't have them, on your attitude, on your heading indicator, they have a heading bug. It's literally, so it'll be, 360 degree. They have a heading bug that you can turn. It's just a little notch that moves around. I always bug where the wind is coming from, and it makes a little notch and a visual representation because the heading indicator is almost like this, where it has a plane in the middle. And when you mark a heading bug, so let's say like we mark right here that if you imagine this being a 360-degree compass, it'll show your plane. You then have the ability to bug it. Now you have a visual representation of how the wind is currently hitting your plane. So if we now turn 90 degrees to the right, this will switch and be hitting our plane like this. So now we have to actually move our ailerons to the new way that the wind is hitting us, if that makes sense. So the way that you hold your controls is always changing because as we taxi, we are constantly changing directions. Not so much here because our taxiway is super easy and simple, but if you go anywhere else, you're constantly turning left, turning right, and you always have to adjust for that. So keep that in mind. Us as instructors will always kind of be like, how should you hold it now? How should you hold it now? So we do drill that into you. I threw on here, the recommended taxi speed is no faster than a brisk walk. That way, if you lose your brakes, you can come to a full stop within a reasonable amount of distance. And if you need to put that in numbers, they recommend that you don't taxi faster than 12 knots or so on the ground. Okay, going over the standard traffic pattern. So every traffic pattern is square. A standard traffic pattern will always be left-handed traffic, left-hand turns. So this square, if we're taking off, it looks like runway 35, we take off, we then would turn left, and we want to do touch and goes, meaning that we're going to stay in the pattern, land, take off, stay in the pattern, land, take off. You take off, you do a left-hand turn, left-hand turn, left-hand turn, left-hand turn. That's standard. You always do that unless otherwise published. They will always publish on a sectional chart, whatever airport you're going to, if they require a right-hand traffic pattern. It's indicated by, it'll say RP, capital RP, by a number. So like the sectional for Meadow Lake Airport, we actually do have a right-hand traffic pattern. It says RP 33 and I think 08. So that means do a right-hand pattern. If nothing was listed, you do a left-hand pattern. That's always your go-to. So we then have legs within the traffic pattern. The first leg, so we take off, this first leg is called your departure leg. That's the proper name for it. You are always going to hear it referred to as upwind. So air traffic control will say extend your upwind. What they're really saying is extend your departure. So that's one thing I want you guys to be aware of. That's the technical term, but it'll always be referred to as upwind. Then you have 90 degrees from that, you have your crosswind. So yeah, so the question was, what do you mean extend your departure? If they say extend your departure, let's say there are just 10 planes in the pattern, they're like, oh my gosh, this is chaotic. To space planes out even farther, they'll have you do a longer than usual takeoff. So they're just saying, just take off and keep flying straight. Extend your pattern before you turn left, if that makes sense. And we'll go over that. So I'm just going over the legs. So crosswind, your first left. From crosswind, you make another left, obviously paralleling. And this is all based on wind. So the wind right here is coming towards us. It's favoring this runway 35. So that's why it's called upwind. We're going against wind. This is crosswind because we're literally cutting across the wind. Then we have downwind because we're going with the wind. And then we just have base and final. So there's nothing special about that. So a normal entry, if you go out, depart, go practice maneuvers, and you're coming back to an airport, a standard entry in which you will always enter, unless being directed otherwise by air traffic control, you will always enter midfield, 45 degrees on the downwind. So let's say we're out here, we're flying in, we set ourselves up so we can come in, and runway 35 is being favored. We cut in 45 degrees, enter this downwind, and now fly the rest of the rectangular course. You then do your base to your final. So now your question is, okay, we take off, we're on our upwind. When do we turn crosswind? The FAA answer is, before I get to that, I have to talk about one other thing. We have TPA, which is traffic pattern altitude. Traffic pattern altitude for general aviation aircraft will usually always be 1,000 feet above airport elevation. So here at Meadow Lake, we're roughly 6,885 feet. So our traffic pattern altitude would be and I round up, so I say 7,900 feet. So that's traffic pattern altitude. So if you fly into a place, and airports list their traffic pattern altitude, but if you ever fly into an airport and you don't know, just add 1,000 feet, and that should be your traffic pattern altitude. That's standard. So now, knowing traffic pattern altitude is 7,900, when we take off, we're on our upwind or departure leg. When do we turn crosswind? The FAA states that you should turn crosswind when you're 300 feet below traffic pattern altitude. That is the FAA answer. Can we always do that? No. We are at nearly 7,000 feet on a hot day when we have high density altitude. The air is just crappy. We're taking off with an engine that's 150 horsepower. Are we gonna hit 300 feet below traffic pattern altitude within a reasonable amount of distance? No. We'll probably fly all the way midway to Pueblo before we hit that. So there are exceptions. Your instructors will walk you through that. It's obviously what you can do safely, but we help you recognize local landmarks here. But the FAA answer is 300 feet below traffic pattern altitude. And if you can do that, do it. If you're at Colorado Springs, they have, I think, a 13,000 foot runway. You can get pretty dang close before you turn your crosswind to that altitude. Actually, also in the winter, because we have denser air, we have better performance out of our planes. So in the winter, you have better performance and you're more likely to hit these than in the summertime when you have less dense air. So then, okay, we turn upwind to crosswind, 300 feet below traffic pattern altitude, from crosswind to downwind. Again, FAA answer is roughly between half to 1 nautical mile away from the runway. Again, you look at that, and that's purely judgment based, right? So that's the FAA answer. And if you're flying in an unfamiliar airport, you always fly a standard traffic pattern. Your goal is to not turn crosswind until 300 feet below traffic pattern altitude. You then try to gauge yourself between half a mile to a mile, nautical mile from the runway. For us instructors, it depends on the wind and stuff, but we say once you turn 90 degrees, wings level, count 3 to 5 Mississippis. That gets you around there. Then you turn crosswind to downwind. Really, so what happens is those 1,000-footers that I point out, the aiming point, we have those here at Meadow Lake. Some instructors use the numbers. Let's say you're coming into land and you want to touch down on the numbers 3-5. When you're on the downwind, you start setting up to land beam your touchdown point. So usually what that's going to look like, you're going to apply carburetor heat to your engine. You're going to reduce your throttle so you can start a descent, and you're going to add flaps so you can approach at a slower airspeed without stalling. So that's going to be the initiator of your descent to land, is roughly when you are abeam, your touchdown point. Then we start our descent. How do we know when to turn downwind to base? Your touchdown point is this 3-3. The FAA answer is once you're approximately 45 degrees abeam your touchdown point. So you're constantly looking at the runway. So when you're flying past, you're looking at the runway, judging, am I 45 degrees abeam the point I want to land? Yep, now I can turn my base. You turn your base, and then there's really no answer when to turn base to final. You want to turn early enough so that when you complete your turn, you're aligned with the runway. And that really just comes with time and experience. Trust me, you're going to overshoot, you're going to undershoot, but you start to learn kind of when to turn. So there's really no set rule on when to turn base to final. It's more judgment. But you never want to wait until you're parallel with the runway on base, because if you wait until you're parallel, you're always going to overshoot. So you have to initiate your turn before you're aligned with the runway. That way, when you roll out on final. So you want to have questions about that? I know that's a lot, and you will go over it more in depth when you train. But that is a typical traffic pattern. And if you fly the standard FAA defined traffic pattern, you can go to any airport in the country and land exactly where you want to. This is how you should fly if you go to Colorado Springs, if you come here, if you go to Daytona Beach, anywhere. That's the standard traffic pattern. So again, standard entry, if you're out coming into the airport environment, 45 downwind entry, you set yourself up, do your base, final, and then go to a full stop. When you're departing and you're trying to depart from the runway, you take off. You can either depart straight out, depending if this is a single runway, you could depart whatever direction, depending on if it's feasible. If you're flying over houses or stuff that have noise abatement, you'll kind of have to re-examine. So you can either depart, to the right, straight out, to the east, turn to the north. Let's say you can't turn out to the right here because we have a parallel runway. You could fly the traffic pattern, fly north, extend your downwind, then turn right and go on your heading. Segmented circles. So a good amount of airports have these. Segmented circles are a way to, if you're flying to an unfamiliar airport, you can overfly the airport at a safe altitude, roughly 500 feet above, 1,000 feet above, and overfly, and you will literally see this on the ground. a circle with some wind indicator in it and these marks coming out from the circle. Segmented circle is kind of weird to describe to people. The center of it indicates, so these long arms indicate runways. These short arms indicate a base. So the runway is leading to the segmented circle. So if you're landing on a runway, really your only option is coming this way because it's going towards the center of the circle. If you're trying to land on this, you're really only coming at it from the right, landing towards the center of the circle. Same runway, opposite ends. However, these little ones indicate your base. So we know that we kind of have to land going towards the segmented circle. So our option is going in this indication of the one on the right. We have to land going from right to left. This is indicating our base, which is sticking out on the top of it. That means I have to turn my base to the right to intercept final. So this is telling me that to land on this runway, I have to actually make right-handed traffic pattern. The opposite is true for the one on the left side. You land going towards the segmented circle. So my option is landing going from left to right. The base is sticking onto the top. So to turn from my base to the runway, I have to turn left. So this is telling you if you're landing on this runway, you make left-handed traffic pattern. Does that make sense? I know segmented circles are kind of confusing. And then, yeah, the wind indicator in the middle obviously is in the middle to help you decide which runway is the obvious runway to land on. Parallel runways, we have one of these because we have a dirt strip where we do glider operations. So parallel runways, you have to be more cautious and more precise about your patterns. So again, we have a right pattern. We have a left and a right pattern to avoid going into the other runways left and right pattern. So if both aircraft are landing from left going right, like this shown, you can see this traffic landing on this runway, they have to do right-hand turns, while this traffic landing on this runway has to do left-hand turns. That separates us from each other. You still would enter on the 45 downwind. Now, like what I was talking about, if you depart straight out 45 degrees to whatever direction that would be, or 90 degrees. Or if this is a control tower, they can help you operate around the other traffic. What you have to be very, very careful of is one, always stay over your runway. Wind wants to push you one way or another. So if we have a wind from the top, like going from top to down, so if the wind was blowing this way, this traffic is much more likely to be blown over this runway traffic. So as you start flying, you have to make corrections, and it's called crabbing into the wind, where you step on your rudder pedal, whichever one. In this case, it would be a left rudder pedal for this current situation. That turns our nose slightly to the left so that we'll be fighting the wind and won't be blown into over this runway, invading this traffic space. It's like a boat going across water, across stream. If it's fighting a current, to go straight, it has to angle itself to actually go straight because the current wants to push it to the side. Same is true with flying. The other thing you have to be really aware of is your base to final leg. If both planes overshoot, you're risking the potential for a collision. So usually what I train my students to do when we have paralleling runways and both are active, because sometimes both parallel runways won't be active. Here, sometimes we'll have glider operations going, sometimes we won't. If we don't, I have them fly a normal traffic pattern. If we do have parallel operations in place, I kind of have them cut at a 45-degree angle, so they're coming in at an angle and then intercept final. That way, we don't have the option to overshoot and potentially collide with another aircraft on the parallel runway. It only gets trickier. Mesa Gateway in Arizona has this. So now you're talking about, what if you have 3 runways, left, center, right? Now it gets super tricky, but those will always have a control tower to walk you through it. But that's just something to be aware of. And honestly, a lot of airports, Colorado Springs has one, Air Force Ground has one, Pueblo has one, we have one, Centennial has one. So it's not like you're not going to encounter it. They are very common. We went over standard entry patterns for traffic pattern. These are a couple non-standard entries. If you have the option, always do a standard entry of entering midfield 45 degree on the downwind. However, sometimes you can't do that, or it's, maybe you are the only one in the area. These are 2 examples. You can overfly the runway roughly 500 feet above pattern altitude, cross the downwind, do a descending, pretty much 270 turn, and now you can see you're entering like a standard downwind. You're still entering at that 45 degree midfield downwind. So if you have the choice, do the standard one. Your second choice will be this one. Your last choice will just be overflying the field and entering it the other way. If there's no one in the traffic pattern, this is totally fine. If you have a busy pattern, you don't really want to do that, especially if you're going to uncontrolled airports. Uncontrolled airports don't require airplanes to have radios. So sometimes people aren't even communicating and they are flying. So that's something to be aware of. If you always enter a standard way, your likelihood of avoiding collision is much higher. All right, radio communications. So great pilot has great discipline, radio discipline. What I like to say is, say what you need to say, no less, no more. You have people of all ranges making all different radio calls. Some people take forever. You'll hear them say, "Good day, Meadow Lake traffic. This is blah, blah, blah. And I'm about, I'd say 13 miles to the north. I think I'm gonna," and it's just like, this is taking way too long. You also have people who say, "Taking off runway 15. Great, then what? So have radio discipline. You need to say what you need to say, no less, no more. Otherwise, you're taking up unnecessary time, or you're not communicating effectively for other pilots to know where you are or what you're doing. So really just getting into it, we always use the phonetic alphabet and numbers. Phonetic alphabet is pretty straightforward. If you don't know it and intend to fly, memorize it. You're going to be using it like crazy. That's all everyone ever references. I pointed out some of the numbers that are interesting in aviation that you could mispronounce if you just pronounce them regularly. So 3 is commonly referred to as tree. 5 is fife, 9, niner, and 0, 0, not O. So don't say O if you're referring to 0. Runways, like I said earlier, they're pronounced as single digits. So 17 is 17. Altitudes, these take a little while to get used to when reporting. And other people never have to deal with this in general aviation, but because we are at high altitudes, you pronounce thousands normal up until 10,000. So we're at 3,000 feet, 9,000 feet, 9,500 feet. You then reach 10,000 feet. You actually pronounce the thousands as single digits, and then you can say 100 as 100. So 10,000 would be 10,000. If you're saying 11,500, it'd be 11,500. All the way up to 17,999 feet, because at 18,000 feet begins flight levels. That also, as you guys learned, is class alpha airspace. So airliners or instrument rated pilots are flying at 18,000 feet. These are then referred to as flight levels. So you would hear fly flight level 180, fly flight level 230. That'd be 23,000 feet. Common phrases, and I hear people kind of get these mixed up all the time. You'll hear Wilco a lot over the radio. That means I will comply. So pilots will, ATC will say, I don't know, upon departure, fly straight out, and they'll say Wilco. So that's saying I will comply, saying I will fly straight out. Roger is for I understand. Affirmative is that is correct. So again, you'll hear people say Roger Wilco. They combine it. But I hear people misuse these a lot, and kind of swapping affirmative as Roger and Roger as affirmative when you can kind of tell. What you can do, so what will help you with radio calls is this liveatc.net. There is a mobile version, but you actually have to pay. But if you access it through your web browser, you can listen to it freely. Go to liveatc.net, type in an airport identifier. So if you want to hear Colorado Springs, it would be KCOS. If you want to hear Denver, it'd be KDEN. And then, I don't know, a couple others. Pueblo is KPUB. And then Centennial Airport, which is Southern Denver, is KAPA. And when you go onto this website, it'll give you different things that you can listen to. So it'll give you the option to listen to approach, listen to ground, listen to tower, listen to departure, listen to all of them. See what the different calls are like. Tower is going to be saying stuff like cleared to take off 17 left. Approach is going to say, go ahead and fly a heading of 120 and descend to 2000. Ground is going to be saying you're cleared to taxi via Alpha, Bravo, blah, blah, blah. So listen to different frequencies. Try to pick up what they're saying, because when you first hear it, it's a lot to take in. And then if you can, try to repeat what they said. Because you are listening to air traffic control, and air traffic control requires a readback. So aircraft are going to be saying back exactly what they heard. So just try to also practice that as well. Making radio calls. This is what you should include in your radio calls. 1, who you are addressing. So the example is Meadow Lake traffic. 2, who you are. All of our planes are Cessna Skyhawks 172, so it's fine to say Skyhawk, blah, 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 followed by the tail number. If you just say Cessna to an air traffic controller, they're going to say, what type of Cessna are you? So that's why I say Skyhawk, because when you say Skyhawk, they know, okay, you're 172. 3 is where you are. So where you are in relation to the airport, or, yeah. So in this case, it'd be 10 miles to the east. And then your intentions. In this example, it could be inbound. We're flying to Meadow Lake, setting up for a 45-degree entry for runway 15. And then at uncontrolled towers, you close again with who you are addressing. Because someone may tune in to the frequency, hear a call, and not know if that was from Meadow Lake. Maybe all they heard was 10 miles to the east, inbound, set them for a 45-degree. And if they're in the traffic pattern on crosswind, that might raise some concern. But by finishing with Meadow Lake traffic, then they know, oh, yep, you're coming. I better keep my eyes out for you. At a controlled tower, you don't need to finish by saying whoever the controlled tower is. So you can open saying Colorado Springs approach, but you don't have to finish it with saying Colorado Springs approach. So that leads us into uncontrolled tower radio calls. You transmit over the CTAF, which is Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. And this usually has a big C and your sectional. And all other airplanes in the area are transmitting over this as well. It's all self-announced. So pilots are responsible for providing other pilots your information. Report every leg in the traffic pattern and your intentions. Exactly what we just went over. So An example here would be, well, call every base, and then it'd be taking off runway 15, departing to the east. That way they know you're going to take off and go to the east. Taking off 15, remaining in the pattern. That way other people know, okay, he's going to take off and just stay within the pattern. At this airport, you're going to hear so many calls, and so many people think that they have the right way to say everything. The FAA just wants you to call whatever leg you're on and your intention. A lot of people say turning. A lot of people just say base. I like to instruct just saying whatever you're on. When you turn base to final, that should be your initiator to make the call. However, a lot of people are work overloaded, task saturated, and say turning base or turning final. There's nothing wrong with that. However, discipline is just calling it. There's a lot of people who argue. They will probably get on your case for your radio calls. If that's the case, tell them to talk to your instructor or talk to us. There's a lot of people out here that have their own ways of doing anything. We teach what the FAA says. So as long as you are saying those 5 things in your calls, where you are and your intentions, you're doing exactly what you need to. You're saying exactly what you need to. You're not, again, you're not saying any less. You're not saying any more. Usually when you're coming into an airport, you make your initial inbound call 10 nautical miles out. So 10 nautical miles out, you'd say you're 10 miles to the east, inbound, setting up for downwind for whatever runway. Take time to listen before you speak to make sure you're not cutting someone else off, especially at uncontrolled airports. If 2 pilots try to speak at the same time, it jams the frequency, so then no one can hear anything either pilot just said. So take time. If you plug in, don't just plug in and call right away. Make sure no one's talking, find your gap, then call. That way you're not stepping on anyone. Like I put in here, ATC requires a feedback. So when you're talking to air traffic control, you tune into the frequency, you hear them say, SkyWest, climb maintain 3000. SkyWest now has to reply, climb maintain 3000. After SkyWest replies, then you can call. So just know that air traffic control, when they give instructions to aircraft, they require a feedback. So if you just hear air traffic control stop talking and you cut in, you now just cut in front of the required feedback. So keep that in mind. Biggest thing is listen to where people are, build a mental picture of where they are in the airport environment. Airport environments are super busy. You have people departing, you have people entering, you have people remaining in the pattern. Everyone's gonna be making a call. Build a mental picture of where people are in the pattern. That way you know kind of where to jump in. That happens a lot out here. We have Air Force Academy comes to train here to get untowered airport experience. Pueblo comes here, trains here to get untowered airport experience. It gets hectic some days. Sometimes I'm just circling just to find a gap of how to jump in. So build a picture, know where people are. And like I said, radios aren't required. So just because you don't hear someone doesn't necessarily mean no one is in the pattern. Uncontrolled airports like we are don't require a radio. Air traffic control services. You have center. Center, this is really just flight following on a cross-country flight. They're just watching you fly your cross-country trip. They'll make you aware of any traffic along your route. You have approach and departure. Sometimes in like Colorado Springs, this is literally the same person. It's just whatever you're doing, you address them the different way. If you're coming in to land at Colorado Springs, you would say Colorado Springs approach. If you're taking off and departing from Colorado Springs, you would contact departure. Tower is responsible for landing and taking off aircraft. So you contact tower when you're holding short of a runway and ready to take off. Or coming in, approach will say, Skyhawk 62740, go ahead and contact Springs Tower 119.9. Then after you land or before you taxi, you contact ground. Ground is responsible for taxiing. Ground will taxi you around. That's who you contact, like I said, before you taxi, after you land. Clearance is really mostly for IFR flying. They give you your IFR flight route, but for some airports, they do require that you just call them up and they'll say, you're cleared to fly, essentially. It's kind of rare that you guys would be contacting clearance. Air traffic control, what they do is they provide flight following. So again, they'll if you're going on a cross-country flight, they will just put you on the radar, monitor. If they see any traffic that's a concern to you, they'll say, Skyhawk 62740, you have traffic at your 1 o'clock. And it's like, okay, we have traffic in sight. They give you traffic advisories. So exactly what I just said. They let you aware of other traffic. Their responsibility is for keeping us safe. What they're just really trying to do is separate aircraft so there's no collisions. And then they give vectoring. So that's when they assign you a heading to fly. So what that would sound like is it'd say Skyhawk 62740, fly a heading of 120. So they just kind of direct you where to fly. Controlled tower radio calls. They tell you what to do. It's easy. You contact them initially, and then they just tell you what to do. Go ahead and fly towards the runway. Fly that heading of 120. Descend down to 8,500. It's really easy. They just pretty much tell you what to do. And you're required to read back what they tell you. Like what we just went over, know who to contact and its order. So we want to take off. So taking off, start up our engines. We know we need to taxi. Before we taxi, we need to contact ground. We contact ground, they tell us to taxi to the runway. We're holding short of the runway. We now know we need to contact tower. They also tell you who to contact. We contact tower, we're ready to take off. Cool, we take off. Okay, we're departing away. So tower will say contact departure. Know the order of who to contact. If we're approaching, we contact approach. Approach will hand us off to tower. After we land, tower to ground, just like that. So it's important. If you don't know even who to contact first, this helps you through that. When inbound, contact ATC before entering the airspace. Kind of what you guys learned. You have to have two-way communication, and you must maintain that with air traffic control. So contact them before you enter the airspace in which they are the authorities of. Have a knee board to write down air traffic control instructions. Trust me, this will help you a lot. So if you can, buy a knee board, buy a scratch pad, so you can write down, because especially your first initial call when you're approaching an airport is pretty hectic. Because I would call up and say, Springs approach, Skyhawk 62740, roughly 50 miles to the northeast, inbound with Victor. They'd say, Skyhawk 62740, roger that. Altimeter is 3012, squawk 4633. And they may give you a heading to fly. And you have to repeat that back. So I literally, as they're saying it, I write it down. That way it's right there and I can say exactly what they just said. Really, it's your initial call that's the most hectic. Otherwise, they're just saying, fly left, fly right, stuff like that. You must read back all instructions or else they will bother you until you do. So, hold short. You have to read back, hold short. Explicit runway crossings. Line up and wait. That means you can pull onto the runway, but don't take off yet. Get yourself situated, and then they will give you a departure clearance. They'll say, cleared for takeoff. Land and hold short, like we said. What would you guys say if you got that? I'm a student pilot, I can't. Headings, you have to repeat it back. Any headings they give you. Cleared to land, do not land without a clearance. You specifically have to hear them say, cleared to land, blank, blank runway. If you're ever unsure, ask them. am I cleared to land on 17 left? Because that's exactly what I'm approaching at right now. And they'll say, yep, cleared to land 17 left. When they give you cleared for the option is a clearance that if you're coming into land, you can do whatever the heck you want. You can land and come to a full stop. You can land and you can hover above the runway. Well, sorry, you can approach and hover above the runway, take off. You can touch and go. You can land, come to a full stop, take off again. Them saying cleared for the option is literally letting you do whatever the heck you want. And they won't give you that unless it's not that busy. If it's busy, they'll just say, what do you want to do? And if we say touch and goes, he'll say cleared for touch and goes. A big phrase that they say if you're taxiing, if you're landing on an airport, is they'll say ground 0.8. That means contact ground. Ground frequency is universally almost always 121 point something. So if you ever hear a controller say contact ground 0.8, what they're saying is plug in 121.8 into your radio. That's a tricky one. If you're ever unsure, just again, these are humans on the other side. If you're never unsure about what they just said, say, hey, can you repeat that? Or I don't understand this. Don't be ashamed to ask again. Lost communication. So you have to maintain radio contact and controlled airports. What if you lose your communications? What do we do first? Try to diagnose the radio issue. Why is your radio not working? Did you plug in the wrong frequency? Low volume either on the radio or your headsets have volume knobs. Did those get turned down? Did they have jacks that plug in? Did one of those not get pushed in all the way? Unplug it, plug it back in. Just try to troubleshoot potentially something that made you lose communications. And then try to regain communication. Like I said, plugging in different your headphones into jacks. Yeah. If you're ever unsure, you'll hear people say this as you guys train out here. Sometimes it's because no one's in the pattern or we actually did something. You'll hear people say, Medilink traffic, can I get a radio check? Because they don't know, they're transmitting, but they're not hearing anything, or they see planes and they're not hearing anything. So that's them asking other people to respond. And if they hear them, you just respond. We have you loud and clear if you can hear them. Okay, let's say you tried everything, you don't have your radios. Now what? You squawk 7600, and we will get into what the transponder and squawking is the next slide. But essentially, you have a transponder that's putting out your altitude, airspeed, location, and you plug in this code. With this code plugged in, air traffic control can see this guy doesn't have his radio working. So we're going to try to communicate to him in a different way. They may actually still talk to you. If they talk to you and you hear them perfectly fine, you shake your wings, they'll look at you, you shake your wings saying, I hear you. And they'll obviously know if you can hear them if you're following their instructions. If you can't, we have these magnificent light gun signals, which if you buy a kneeboard, most of them have cheat sheets on. Air traffic control will shoot you with these light signals. So it's good to know these, go over these. It has different meanings as if you're in flight or on the ground. So aircraft on the ground, if you get a solid green, they're gonna clear you for takeoff. That clears you for takeoff. Flashing green, you're cleared for taxi. Solid red, stop. Flashing red, taxi clear of the active runway in use. A flashing white means return to the starting point of where you came when you started your engine. So let's say you taxi all the way, get up to the runway, and they flash you with a white. You have to taxi all the way back to where you just came from. And then altering green and red, that's use extreme caution. If you have time and you do this with your instructor and they don't seem busy, because you have to do night flights and you'll most likely do a flight to Colorado Springs, ask your instructor, hey, can we ask Tower to kind of shoot us with some light gun signals so you can actually see what it looks like? It's kind of cool. In the air, steady green, cleared to land, flashing green, and just remain, it's return for landing to hopefully be followed by a steady green. So wherever you are, just fly a normal traffic pattern, approach again, and then they should hit you with the solid green if you're cleared to land. If they shoot you with a steady red, give way to other aircraft and continue circling. So if you're coming in, they shoot you with a red, again, fly your traffic pattern, try again. If they shoot you with a flashing red, means airport is not safe, don't even land there, try a different airport. Flashing white's not applicable in the air. And again, flashing green and red is use extreme caution. Sorry, we're almost done with this section and then we'll take a break. So transponder, like I said, transmits our position, altitude, and call sign. So this transmits it to ATC. They have radar that sends an interrogating signal. Our transponder responds to that interrogating signal, sends it to the radar, displays it on air traffic control's screen. That's how they see aircraft. Well, because we can plug in codes, they can specifically identify certain aircraft. So let's say we're trying to approach Colorado Springs approach, but there's 10 aircraft here. They'll say squawk 4633. By us putting in 4633, they now can identify out of those 10 planes which one we are specifically. Then they'll usually say Skyhawk 670, radar contact. When they say squawk, that just means to input or program a code in your transponder. They will always say squawk. That's really what it means. You have different squawk codes. So 7700 is your emergency code. Let's say you have engine failure, just something's not right about your flight. You have someone having a heart attack. You feel like you're going to pass out. Squawk 7700. That way air traffic knows you're in an emergency. You now have priority. We need to get you on the ground. 76, and again, these are just sayings I use to help remember these. So 77, I'm going to heaven. 76, like we just went over, that's that you're having radio issues. So 76, I need a radio fix. 75 is that you've had a hijack. So you would plug in 7500. ATC knows your plane has been hijacked. They'll most likely send an F-16 to accompany you. And so yeah, 75, I'm being taken alive. 1200 is what we'll always be flying when we're flying in uncontrolled airspace as VFR pilots, meaning that it's clear outside. We type in 1200. So 12, the sky is blue. By the ident button, what that does is they'll say 62740, squawk whatever, press ident. When you press ident, that sends, it makes our dot on their radar screen light up brighter than all the others just to help them find us. And then our transponders have an altitude versus standby mode. So altitude means that we're currently, transmitting all this information. Standby, you use this when you're about to take off. So anytime you're in the air, it should be on altitude. Standby is usually when you start up the engine and you're taxiing. It has our information in there, but it's not transmitting it so that aircraft in the air can only focus on aircraft in the air. That way, aircraft on the ground's not also popping up on the screen, making them worried about other traffic. As of 2020, sorry, this is, I think, the last slide before break. As of 2020, we need ADS-B out. ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. Essentially does the exact same thing as your transponder, except now it's sending out a GPS signal. And so traditional radar, like I said, you have a ground radar sending out a signal. It interrogates our transponder responds to that, sends it back. What ADS-B is doing is it's now transmitting our position, speed, altitude once per second automatically, sending that to GPS. GPS is sending that to a ground station. Ground station is sending that to air traffic control, and this is all happening within milliseconds. So it gives them better accuracy of aircraft, and it allows them to cover a wider range that they weren't able to cover with a transponder, because now this, since it's based off satellites and GPS, it's not the line of sight that transponder needs. It allows them to see pretty much everywhere. So one time, at times where they couldn't provide services because an aircraft was out of range of a radar going over the mountains, so to say, they now can do that because of GPS. And you can think of it as a transponder. Everywhere the transponder is required, like you guys learned, an ADS-B now is required. It's required in Class Alpha, Class Bravo, the Mode C Vale, Class Charlie, Class Echo above 10,000 feet. And then it does get specific over the Gulf of Mexico, but we most likely will never be flying there. They need over the Gulf of Mexico. All right, so we can we'll do 5-minute break. So come back 2020. And then, well, no, we'll do a 10-minute break. So I guess 8:25. Cool. The last section is pretty short. All right, so go into our last section. It's relatively shorter, trust me. We have to talk about wake turbulence in the airborne environment. This is a YouTube moment. So I'm going to show you guys, whenever an aircraft is producing lift, it is producing a wake turbulence, or wingtip vortice is what it's commonly referred to as. We'll pull this up here. I don't know how to mess with Zoom. Yeah, you're good.
Stop the share for a minute.
Okay.
So we can play it in the class.
So now I'm giving you problems.
Is that showing up? Yeah, that should be good.
Cool. So this video demonstrates how each plane, when it's producing lift, aka in the air, is producing wake turbulence that's coming off its wing and almost kind of making a tornado off its wing. You guys have maybe seen this. If not, this is what it looks like. And then pay attention to when he touches the runway. So now you can kind of start seeing these coming off. It'll just get more pronounced. Little mini tornado going behind him. And the moment he touches the runway, watch what happens. They dissipate. So when any aircraft is producing lift, they're producing this wake turbulence, wingtip vortices. Okay. We'll pause that. Oh, yeah. Sweet. Thanks. So, yeah, as you saw, all aircraft generate it. It's just those wingtip vortices are stronger when aircraft are heavier, clean, and slow. What does clean mean? It means that they've raised their landing gear and now their belly is clean. When are these cases most likely to happen? Exactly what we just saw. Heavier planes are at their slowest, takeoff and landing. So you're most likely going to encounter this takeoff and landing, but it happens no matter when we're flying. When we're producing lift, we're always going to, so you can also encounter these in flight. This is created by, pressure differences trying to balance. So you have a high pressure above the wing or below the wing and a low pressure above the wing. Essentially what's happening as that flows over the wingtip, those pressures are trying to balance with each other, creating essentially that tornado type thing. Sorry, this is results of transferring to this computer. So wake turbulence avoidance. The best thing you can do, air traffic control is going to try to give you time so that you can avoid wake turbulence. So when you're trying to take off, a huge airliner just took off in front of you, wait at least 2 minutes before you take off, because those take time to dissipate. Be aware of the wind direction. So generally, wake turbulence, in the previous slide, this isn't a good picture. It goes outward, downward, and backward. So it's kind of just going outward, downward, backward. However, with wind, which is what these are showing, if the wind is blowing this one, it would be from the top down. That's preventing that wake turbulence to go at least outward. So if you have a slight wind fighting against the direction the wake turbulence naturally wants to go, well, look what it's doing over the runway. That's now just going to hang out over the runway instead of dissipating outward. So if you have a light direct crosswind, because this happened, it wants to kind of go outward at around 5 miles an hour. So if you have a crosswind roughly 5 knots, it's just going to be lingering over the runway. So you want to wait a good amount of time before you take off. Another thing is if you take off and follow the flight plan or the flight path of the previous plane, if you're following right behind them, you're most likely, and you still have that crosswind that's keeping his wake turbulence right in front of you, you're going to hit it. So the best thing to do is know which direction the wind is blowing, and you want to go into the direction the wind is blowing so that you can avoid his wake turbulence altogether. So in this case, if we took off and flew straight, we don't want to fly to the right because we can hit his wake turbulence that's being produced on the right, or this can come below. So when we take off, we actually want to offset to the left to now get out of the path of his wake turbulence. So in landing and takeoff, we have this saying called land within the bowl. When an aircraft takes off, the moment they take off, they're producing that wake turbulence. Well, how can you avoid his wake turbulence if you know wake turbulence goes outward, downward, and backward? If you're taking off behind this guy, pay attention to where he rotates and gets airborne. You will try to take off and get airborne above his flight path because we know wake turbulence goes downward. Opposite, if an airplane is approaching and it lands, what you want to do, I guess in this example, you want to approach higher than how he approached and land farther than what he touched down, because that guarantees you're staying above his flight path and not going to hit wake turbulence. Now, you're thinking, how really effective is this? Cessna 172 gets behind a 747 4-engine cargo jet. It's enough to flip us over. So, but if you're behind another Cessna 172, not that bad, right? The bigger the jet, the bigger your fear should be of wake turbulence. Now, this can also be countered in flight. I don't know if I have a slide for that. If you're approaching a plane in level flight, if you're the same level as him, you know his wake turbulence is at least going to sink. So if you're crossing his flight path, you want to climb because you know his wake turbulence is going down. If you're flying behind him, fly at a higher altitude than him. So really, it's just, most of the time, it's being above the wake turbulence. Collision avoidance, we have operation lights on. When you're roughly within 20 nautical miles of an airport, operation lights on kind of says just throw on all your lights, make yourself the most visible that you possibly can to other aircraft. That's what the FAA wants us practicing. Another way to avoid collisions is looking outside 90% of the time, 10% in time, checking your instruments. But with the majority of your attention outside, checking the area, scanning for traffic. Always be aware that increased traffic will always exist at airports and navigation aids, because navigation aids have set routes on them that many people follow as navigation, and they're all going to a point. So there's increased traffic when you're following a navigation aid. There's increased traffic when you're going to an airport. So always have your eyes out and alert when you're approaching an airport. Clearing turns are important. When you're in the practice area, we're going to be doing maneuvers. Before you do any maneuvers, you should do clearing turns. There's 2 ways to do clearing turns. First of all, no matter which way, you always want to do a clearing turn to the left, because right-of-way rules, planes always, if there's a plane behind you that you can't see, which we'll get into the next slide, they will overtake you on the right side. So when you're clearing the area, you always want to do a left turn that way, because if a plane's overtaking you on the right, if you turn right, you might run into them. So you always want to do a clearing turn to the left first. So clearing turns, you can do either 2 90-degree turns in both directions. So you turn 90 degrees to the left, scan the area. After it's scanned, turn 90 degrees back to the right, scan the area. Or you can just do a complete 180-degree turn to clear the area. And then we'll get into high versus low wing sight picture. Like I said, right-of-way rules. An aircraft in distress always has a right-of-way. If you ever hear over the radio that someone is declaring an emergency, they take priority over you, over all your other aircraft. Vice versa, if you are declaring an emergency, you get priority. Then it goes that the less maneuverable aircraft have the right-of-way. So, a hot air balloon, can that maneuver well? No. Hot air balloon pretty much has the right-of-way over all other aircraft. So it has the right-of-way over a glider, aircraft refueling, airship. Then it goes your glider. Glider gives way to a balloon, but then has the right-of-way over an aircraft refueling, airship, airplane, helicopter. Then you have aircraft refueling. They give way to the first two. Then they have the right-of-way over an airship, airplane, and helicopter, or rotorcraft, I should say. Does that make sense to everyone? And essentially, helicopters are the most maneuverable. They kind of have to avoid everyone else. So, right-of-way, when you are overtaking a plane, kind of like what I was saying, you're flying straight, there's a plane right in front of you, you're going faster than he is, you offset to the right, pass him, and then continue on your way. You're going on a collision course with someone. How you roughly know you're going on a collision course is if you see an aircraft and there seems to be no relative movement except it getting bigger, you can pretty much guarantee you're on a collision course with an aircraft. What you do, both planes offset to the right. So if you see an aircraft and you're unsure, offset to the right. Give yourself space. When two planes are converging, so two planes are converging, the plane on the right always has the right of way. It's kind of like a stop sign for cars that many people forget the rule of. If two cars stop at the same time, the person on the right has the right of way. Aircraft, exactly the same. Two aircraft are coming and converging like this. This takes a little bit. This plane has a right of way, he can keep flying. This plane has to offset to the right to give him space. So not an easy way, but one way you can kind of remember this, if you're flying and you see a plane going from your right to left, you have to give way to him. But if you're flying and you see a plane moving from your left to right, you have the right of way over him. At nighttime, we have lights that signify this. So right wing has a green light, red wing has a left light. Left wing has a red light. When these two aircraft are converging, left wing has a red light on this one. That's telling us what to do. We need to stop and give way. He would see our right wing, which is a green light, meaning that he has the green light, he can keep on going. At night, let's say we're overtaking someone, our rear position light is white on our tail. So if you just see a white light, you're going the same direction as another plane. Okay, you're going head on. If you're going head on, you will see both red and green. If you see both red and green, you're coming on head on to an aircraft. So those help you kind of identify at night as well. So if you are seeing a red light, that means you need to stop. They have the right of way. Okay, 2 aircraft in the pattern. Whoever is on final approach has the right of way. You're trying to take off, aircraft on approach on final has the right of way over all other aircraft. 2 aircraft are on approach on final. Now who has the right of way? The one at the lower altitude. Now the FAA caught on to some people taking advantage of this, saying, oh, they would just dive down and say, well, I'm at 9,500, you're at 9.6. Say, I have right of way. So they say, don't take advantage of this rule. On a normal approach, whoever's at the lower altitude, they have the right of way. Yeah. Visual scanning, like I said, if you see no relative motion between you and another aircraft, you're on a collision course. Haze and reduced visibility cause objects to seem farther away than they actually are. I never saw this so clearly other than this summer when we had the fires, because a plane that normally what I would think would be at least 30 miles from me was within like 3 miles. It is bizarre how reduced visibility make an aircraft seem so far away. So be aware that when you have reduced visibility, aircraft are actually closer than what they seem. At nighttime, you want to use your peripheral vision for night scanning. Just how the eyes work, your eyes, they have, in your daytime, they have cones. Those allow you to see color, more depth perception. At night, you use rods. Those are kind of on the side, what you use for peripheral vision. At night, if you've ever noticed, if you look at not a bright light, but a kind of dim light or stars, that you're like, oh, I see a star there. And then you actually look at it and you don't see it, but you look away and it's there. Same is true when you're flying. When you're scanning at night, you kind of just want to use your peripheral vision to scan. It's weird to get used to, but it's more reliable. Don't fixate. Well, now we have aircraft that actually have some of this. Don't fixate on traffic alerts inside the aircraft on your multifunction display. That's MFD. Advanced aircraft have traffic alerting systems. They will scream at you. They'll pop up on your screen. Pilot's mistake is just fixating on the aircraft inside your instrument or inside your aircraft instead of looking outside. So don't fixate within your traffic alert. And then you want to scan the entire area using short spaced eye movements of roughly 10-degree sectors, at least 1 second in each. There's 2 ways to do this. You can start literally on one side, work your way to the other. So work 10 degrees, scan up and down. 1 second, work 10 degrees, scan up and down. Wait, 1 second, scan up and down. We emphasize you always want a clear windscreen when you're gonna take off, because smeared bugs on your windscreen are roughly the same size as traffic and distance. So if you have a dirty windshield, your eyes are gonna be continually focusing on those dead bugs and you can't actually accurately see traffic. So one, clean your windshield every time before your flight. Winter time is kind of an exception. There's not many bugs, but during the summertime, probably between every flight. Another trick, if you're looking off in distance, your eyes naturally want to fixate roughly a couple feet within front of you. That does not help us in visually scanning. A technique when visually scanning is starting with the ground, working your way to the sky. That way you're training your eyes to actually look at a spot in the distance, far off in the distance, and then your eyes will be adjusted and you move up to the sky so you're looking off in the distance. Go over here, pick a spot, scan the ground, pick a spot in the distance, then move up to the sky. Second way you can do it, start in the middle, work one way, come back to the middle, work the other way. A thorough scan should take you roughly 20 seconds. What we also advise in the airport environment, at least, is doing a little bit of shallow banks. That way you're kind of seeing above you, because we have high wings that prevent us from seeing traffic to the side of us and above us, which you're going to see right here. So Cessna, these are the blind spots. We are high wing. We cannot see above us. And we're limited to really just this section and this section. Side view, you're limited. Again, you can't see all that much. You can barely see out your back window. Then we have low wing aircraft where it's opposite. They can't really even see below them at all. They can see above them. If they have an open cockpit, they can literally see everything above them. But most training aircraft, it's blocked off. So you can see here, it does have a roof. So they are also limited to what they can see. What's the danger in this? High wing aircraft. Let's say we're flying in our Cessnas. We can't see above us. There's a plane coming in to land who's a low wing. And he can't see below him. We can't see each other, and that creates a huge collision hazard. So one, if you're ever familiar with high wing versus low wing aircraft, B, if you see a low wing aircraft, no, if I get below him, he cannot see me. And you risk this. It's not just theory, it does happen. And I'm going to show you one more YouTube link where they almost had this happen. I think stop sharing, right?
Let's try that.
I can go full coup. Sweet. This guy's coming in on final, prepared to land. And he's the high wing aircraft. And nearly just had a low wing aircraft run into him. I honestly do not know. It does not get closer than that. I mean, that's feet of separation. So this isn't just theory, it does happen. So just know us as high wing aircraft, we have to watch out. Sorry if I stop casting, it doesn't say any of this, huh? I always forget to use a mouse. Clear communication. Honestly, I think this might be the last slide. Oh, okay, never mind. This is the last slide. So yeah, that's a pretty terrifying video that I saw. But yes, how you prevent that from happening, clear communication. Like I said, there are few exceptions where there may be aircraft operating. Many old, and we have a lot here. There are a couple flying today. Many old military planes. A lot of those were low wings. Some of them don't have radios. So again, you're going to have those rare cases where people aren't communicating on radio and where some pilots are crazy. I mean, this is an uncontrolled field, so there's no one monitoring and people do crazy stuff. Which sure, if they're the only ones in the traffic pattern, have fun, go for it, as long as you're being safe, right? It's another, as long as someone else is in, then, and you will see that. I mean, there's a lot of crazy people that just do whatever the heck they want without any regard. I avoid accidents, I think, without exaggeration, every other day because people just being crazy. It doesn't really happen at a controlled airport because air traffic control is telling you what to do and they will not let that happen. But an incident like that, again, rare, but it happened because lack of communication on someone's part. Yeah, just people, they just get crazy. Again, we as CFIs, we try to get on them, and that's why we are in the plane. And that's why we train you per FAA rules. People who think they're God's gift to aviation think they're above this. So I'm always aware. I can see exactly what they're doing and say, nope, let's pull 180, get away from this, let them do this thing, and then come in. Because some people, Again, they think they're God's gift to aviation. They think you stink because you're following the FAA rules for what normal practices are. And that's fair. I mean, you see it here and there at uncontrolled towers. So it's the reality that you do. But what leads to that? Lack of communication. Like I was saying, proper radio calls, say no less, say no more. Say exactly what you need to, say where you are, who you are, your intentions, and everyone knows what you're doing. It's when people aren't communicating properly that you get those. Or just forget, oh, I should actually hold short before getting onto the runway. I have people cut me off when I'm on short final. They pull onto the runway because they didn't even look because they're too used to flying out here without getting clearance. And I call them out. I'm like, I'm going around, you cut me off on final. And per right-of-way rules, who has the right-of-way? Aircraft on final. He failed to check. He failed to listen to what I was saying. So it's not, I make it sound like it happens crazy amount, but that's because I'm flying a lot. But we always call out those people, and you can always report unsafe activity to the FAA. If you get a tail number and they're doing something really dumb, report that immediately to the FAA. So this is what happened, this is plane. The FAA will come out and inspect that person, inspect their logbook, inspect the rating, everything like that. So there are ways to report people being really dumb. Okay, traffic advisory. Sorry, this is the last slide. Traffic advisories, pretty straightforward. Like I said, air traffic control will alert you of other traffic. However, traffic advisories are based off an airplane's ground track. When we have wind and we're correcting for wind, like this example, to fly straight path, all air traffic control sees is this straight path. So they think our nose is aligned with this arrow when really we're crabbing for the wind. So they like to report it in, shoot, what's it called? Whatever, clock, right? Traffic 1 o'clock, traffic 2 o'clock, traffic 3 o'clock. One thing you have to be aware of is if you are ever correcting or, crabbing for wind, when they say traffic 1 o'clock, they only see this, or I should say 12 o'clock in this example. If they say traffic 12 o'clock, you look at 12 o'clock, well, you don't really see anything. But they see you guys are on a collision course. If you're crabbing for the wind and you don't see the aircraft that they're telling you in the spot they're telling you, within a couple seconds, widen your range. Because 1, aircraft are moving fast. 2, everyone could be correcting for wind, so that really my 12 o'clock is 3 o'clock, So that's just one thing to be aware of when you get traffic advisories from air traffic control, is they might not be where they actually say they are if you're adjusting for wind. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, the middle part was super long. If you guys have been filling out logbooks, feel free to write in airport operations. We did 3 hours, and then I can sign your logbooks. And if anyone wants any questions answered or anything, I can also do that. And Zoom people, party hardy.